Hello. Hola. Buenos dias. React Alicante, I'm so stoked to be here. This is like one of my favorite conferences. It's my second year here. I will come back every year that they will have me. I love it here. Beautiful city, beautiful organizers. They do such a great job. Hands for the organizers, please. Yeah, cool. So I've never opened a conference before. So this is, I used to play in bands, and I have been in an opening band many, many times because we were never very good. And that's kind of how it works when you're the opening band, especially if you're touring and nobody knows who you are. You show up, there's like 5 people in the audience, and there's like whatever, like bring on the main event. But this is, it's like the opposite, where like now I have everyone and you're all fresh and you're like excited to learn, so there's a lot more pressure that way. But I'm excited. So let's jump right into it. When I submitted my talk to this conference, I knew that I wanted to talk about React 19 and how all of the new features that we will surely talk about throughout this conference, but I'm sure you're all familiar with at this point too. I just wanted to kind of talk about composition and how everything sort of fits back into first principles. So I came up with this concept. I was watching a lot of Game of Thrones at the time and House of the Dragon and all that stuff, so you know, the kings and swords and all that. So I had like composition is king. But then I started working on the talk, and like the metaphors weren't quite hitting. It was a little too niche, so I thought I'd change it up a bit. And I came up with sandwiches. But I didn't have time to change the title, so I started like workshopping things a little bit. And oh, now my clicker's not working either. That's okay. We're just gonna do. Hey, there we go. So all right, now we're back. Cool. All right, so rewind. Okay, so we wanted to talk about sandwiches, and so I had to start workshopping new titles. Came up with a couple. None of them really sounded right, so I just sort of landed on this guy. So pretend that this is the title of my talk. React's Uncomposables. This is not an American audience. I don't know how big of a hit this particular snack I'm going to talk about was outside of the US. Raise your hand if you know about Uncrustables. Anybody? No? Okay, great. This is awesome. So we're off to a great start. Cultural references that are not going to hit. We're going to all right, we're going to work on that. So the year was 1901. A little history lesson. What's happening then? Well, I think was Abdul Hamid II was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The Austro-Hungarians had just expanded their empire by taking land in northern China. Anastasia, whom the movie Anastasia and Many a Tale, the last daughter of the last Tsar of Russia, was born. And the peanut butter sandwich, or the peanut butter jelly sandwich, was invented. And at least one of those things was around 20 years later, so that's cool. But the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you know, it wasn't the first sandwich, right? Like we'd had sandwiches in the past. In fact, we had peanut butter sandwiches, and people were eating peanut butter on bread, very common thing. But you know, the peanut butter sandwich, or the peanut butter and jelly sandwich rather, I don't think that it would be possible without the core foundation of the sandwich itself, which is composability, right? The fact that someone took a peanut butter, this is just how I like to imagine the history. Who knows what actually happened, but I like to imagine someone sat down with their peanut butter sandwich, took a bite. It was a little dry. Maybe they didn't have milk to wash it down with. They thought maybe it was just missing something. And they're like, well, I have some jelly in the fridge. If, you know, 1901, they didn't have a fridge, but like, just stay with me here. They had some jelly in the pantry that hadn't quite spoiled yet, and they're like, let me just throw this on here. And they could do that because they could open the sandwich and they could just spread some jelly on the bread and close it back up. It was open to them. And it was like fundamentally this composable thing that you could just sort of add things to the mix. And you know, we invented the perfect sandwich that way, and we just enjoyed peanut butter jelly sandwiches for the rest of eternity, and we're still enjoying peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And that was all great. And then in 1995, great year, my home team, Atlanta Braves, won the World Series. So if you're a baseball fan, go Braves. What else? Olympics were also in Atlanta, so that was kind of cool. Big year for Atlanta, actually. So I don't know if anyone's been to Atlanta, but hometown. So yeah, 95 was a big year. Also a big year for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because someone at the Smucker's Corporation decided they could improve upon the peanut butter and jelly sandwich by introducing this guy, the Uncrustable. They thought, well, kids don't really like the crust on their sandwiches, so let's just go ahead and take that off. And also, like, why not just close it up? We're gonna just take the sandwich, we're gonna pinch the edges around so you can't get anything in, you can't really get anything out until you start eating it. And we think this is a superior design, right? So now we have the Uncrustable. Yeah, and everything is just sort of in there. If you, it looked like nobody in the crowd knew what Uncrustables were, so this is what an Uncrustable is. It's essentially a pocket of bread stuffed with peanut butter and jelly, and what you get in the Uncrustable is what you get when you eat, and you don't really have the option to open it up and put much on there. So if the Uncrustable was a React component, it would look a little something like this. You notice it doesn't take any props. You can't put anything into it. It's a pinched piece of bread with stuff inside, and that's what you get. That's it, right? And that's not so bad. Like, in a React component, sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want to have a closed component. The whole idea is like this encapsulation, and with React, you get to control that encapsulation. You get to tell the consumers of your component what they can and can't do, to a degree. But developers, we are clever creatures. And if we want to get into your component, we're going to get into your component, right? If I'm really clever, and I just hack off the edges of this thing, and I just manage to make my way into the Uncrustable, I'm going to shove something in there. If I want to add bananas, I like bananas in my PB&J, I'm going to just cut it open and shove some bananas in there. And so, you know, who's written a component like this? You got a closed component, and you're like, well, I can't get anything in there. So I'm going to go jump around and use STRICKLAND and just start doing all this nonsense, and I'm going to get my damn bananas in that sandwich. All right? Written lots of components like this. And so maybe we didn't really fix the sandwich. Maybe the sandwich never needed fixing. Maybe its composability was its feature. It's sort of the root of the sandwich. And so, like, maybe we didn't really need to change too much about it. If I want to add bananas, add bananas. If I wanted to add marshmallows, add marshmallows. I think ChatGPT sort of hallucinated. I don't know what's going on up here. And also, this is like weird. I think this is jelly and like a piece of wood. I'm not entirely certain. Anyway, this is what I did my slides very quickly, so I didn't draw all this, but you get the picture. So let's back up for a minute, and let's talk about React 19. I think I jumped the gun on the slide there. So React 19, how does it have to do with sandwiches? Well, it does, let me tell you. So everyone knows about server components, right? Everyone knows about server actions. React 19 is kind of funny. It's a lot different than previous versions of React in a lot of important ways. And a lot of folks, I think, look at this a little confused. How did we get here? Why the heck is React telling me that I need a server? Why does it care so much? You know, it's a SPA framework. Why is it doing all the server stuff? And why does it look so weird? What are these weird hooks? Why are my components async now? Everything feels not React. We've kind of jumped the shark a little bit. Why doesn't React get back to basics, right? And I'm here to tell you that they never really strayed that far from the light in the first place, and React 19 is honestly just a natural extension of what it's always been about, which is composition. And so my friend Ryan, he said, if you want to understand React, you have to first understand that the only sacred thing in React is composition. Everything else is rejected, or it takes a back seat as an acceptable trade-off. Now, what does he mean by that? There we go. All right. So let's take a look at this. Let's just go back through time for a minute. In the early days of React, we all kind of had a client, right? Like everything was rendered on the client. We throw a blank index HTML file with a blank div, and we say, throw my app in there. Boom. Client does everything. Everyone's happy. But some folks found that the server was actually very useful. Maybe they needed SEO. E-commerce sites really benefit from a server. And so, React always had some server-side APIs for server rendering particularly, but it was only really rendering. It wasn't doing pretty much anything else. So you have like a little bit of server here, but then we hand everything off to the client. We hydrate. Now the client's in charge of pretty much everything, takes over. And then over time, the server kind of got more and more responsibilities for a lot of apps. We actually found out that for a lot of classes of apps, the server was very useful, and maybe we should move a lot of that work we were doing from the client to the server, and saw a lot of benefits. And we sort of get here And we realized that when we're doing, say, half of our work on the server, we start to lose a little bit of what React had to offer in the first place when it comes to composition. What if the peanut butter jelly sandwich was sort of the half of the client, one half of the client, one half of the server, were two halves of the same sandwich? That's not really the metaphor that I was going for. I just like that image. So what we're actually going to do here is we're going to frame this as we've got a server, or the person who serves you the sandwich, on one side, and we have the client, the consumer of the sandwich, on the other side, and we need to somehow get that sandwich across that very hard line. They're fundamentally two different people or two different entities that we need to get some stuff across, and how can we do that in a way that maintains composition and React's beautiful composition patterns? And so let's take a look at what we would do today. Say you've got this sandwich artist component, and they got some bread, they have some ingredients. We don't really know where those come from yet. We know that we need to get them from the server, but we don't know how we're going to get them there. And we need to take that and we need to pass it into the person who's going to consume that sandwich, and then build the sandwich out of the bread and all the ingredients, and we're just going to pass it right on to the person eating the sandwich, right? And so you have like server-side frameworks like Remix and Next, pre-server components next. We'll talk about that. But I use Remix. I helped build Remix, so that's what I'm familiar with. So we'll look at the Remixism here. We have ourselves a loader, which is responsible for handling all the server stuff, and it sort of lives in the same file as a route, but it's not really the same thing. You can't just throw it in the mix of your component and compose it like everything else. It's a separate entity that's responsible for all of the server work, and we sort of build that up. It might take an order from a request, compile some ingredients from that request, and then fetch those from the kitchen, and then return a response with your preferences so that we can actually build that sandwich. And then you've got the person who's eating the sandwich, and they'll just eat anything, so they just pass it right onto their mouth. They don't care. They're like me. They're not very picky. But this guy has a few side effects. On when he chews the sandwich, he's going to enjoy that sandwich. When he swallows, he's going to digest. And of course, by the sheer nature of having food, happiness sets in as a side effect. And so this is a client component, right? Like this is something that necessarily needs to run on the client. But does our artist need to run on the client? He's not really doing anything client specific. He's just taking some stuff from the server and passing it along. So how do we do this? And then maybe we have a sandwich menu that's responsible for submitting the order in the first place, but we can't really tell it how to do that. We can just send it, because the server's doing that work, right? So all we have really is a form and a place to submit the form, but we have no way of passing in the actual instructions from the menu. It's not really that composable from that sense. So it's sort of passed off somewhere else. And so that's what I mean when I say we sort of lose just these nice composition patterns that React gives us. So fast forward to React 19 and server components, and this looks a little different. Instead, our component now can operate directly on the server. So everything we need to render this component is right here. So it might take an order from that request. We might get we start to fetch the ingredients from the kitchen. But this is kind of cool. We notice that we're not awaiting this fetch. We're just returning the promise, and we're passing it directly into this customer component here, which is interesting. Turns out suspense is a really awesome API, by the way, because when it's enabled for data fetching, which it will be in 19, this is pretty awesome. You can render a fallback while this guy resolves and everything, the tree suspends. And then our sandwich customer can then take that promise and then just unwrap it with this magical use hook. And then once everything is good to go, it's just going to pass it right along to the guy eating the sandwich. And then everyone's happy. Of course, our sandwich eater still has some effects. It still runs on the client, so nothing really changes except for this guy. We got to do that a little bit. It's kind of irritating, but that's okay. We'll use client action, never hurt anyone. And yeah, so just React 19 just enables and re-enables all these beautiful composition patterns that React has always enabled. And it does so in this really interesting way where you have these portals between different environments, these barriers that were impossible to cross before without giving up that composition. And now you have all of that. So you have these doors and these different entry points. And so a server component might take another server component as a child. It might also take a client component as a child. And that client component can take a client component, or it can take another server component, and we just sort of portal into one environment from another, maintaining all of that beautiful composition, all that flexibility of React. And so really what I want you to take away from this is just, it's not nearly as weird as it seems when you start to unwrap it. And when you realize that everything that React has ever been about, it's really been about two fundamental principles. Your UI is a function of your state. If your state changes, we blow away everything and we give you a new state. Principle number one. Principle number two is composition. Everything else we put on the chopping block if we need to. We're always going to put these two principles first. And I think it's quite lovely, and it's why I'm still very bullish on React and the future of React. So thank you very much. My name is Chance, and if you want to find me on the internet, that's where you do it. Enjoy the conference.